My name is Frederick Park, and I live in the high mountains of western North Carolina near Mount Mitchell. I'm the guy who started the Old Farmer's Ball.
I'm Julia Weatherford, and I was around during the formation of the Old Farmer's Ball and definitely very involved in it.
My name is Phil Jamison. I live here in Asheville. I moved here in 1980 to join a performing group called the Greengrass Cloggers. And every place we went, people would want to know about Southern Appalachian clogging. And so I got interested in the stories behind these and ended up writing a book, Hoedowns, Reels, and Frolics, about the Southern dance traditions.
I'm Dede Styles. I live in Swannanoa. I'm a heritage dyer. I gather wild plants and make natural dyes like old-timey people used to do.
What is your connection to the Old Farmer's Ball?
When they first started it up, this girl was living at my house, I think 1981. She saw a notice down at the Dulcimer shop that they were having the dance. And she wanted to go, but she wouldn't go by herself, so I started going to the dance. It was pretty much fun. The hall was historic, let's say.
It's the oldest standing dance hall in the state of North Carolina, built as a dance hall, and I think it should be on the National Historic Register.
We went regular. There weren't a whole lot of people at first. And so we got to be kind of part of the crew where we would go and vacuum it and clean it all up for the dance.
Jerry and Lily Wooten own the building. Jerry has passed away now, but he had small gatherings, friends who would play music, mostly just old country stuff. And I stopped one summer night. The doors were open, and I could see people sitting in the middle of an open wooden floor.
The dance hall had been built in the mid-1930s by a couple local families, and it ran from the mid-30s to the mid-50s, turned into a public dance, and was attracting people from around the area.
This was the end of 1980. I stopped in one night, and they just waved me in, pointed to an empty chair. I sat down, and after a while they stopped singing, and somebody turned and said, "Do you play music?" I said, "Yeah, I do." So they said, "Well, you got it with you?" And I said, "No, I don't. But I'll come back. I just thought maybe I'd just sit here and listen for a while." And they said, "Well, yeah." So as the evening wore on, I finally sussed out who the owner was and visited with him very nonchalantly, just sort of right in front of everybody, about a half dozen people, that's all. I told him I play harmonica and play a little guitar, and he said, "Well, come back anytime." So I did. And I went a few times just to play music. And after they sort of got used to me, wanted to know a little more about me, I said, "Well, I'm a collector and a presenter of old-time dance." And that's when Jerry opened up and told me about Raymond Peake, the man who had built the place, who was still alive at the time and who lived in Old Fort. He told me the place had been a dance hall, and they did old-time traditional dances.
The dances would have been Southern Appalachian square dances, which at that point in time meant big circle dance.
Well, I had come to Asheville from having been Jennifer Armstrong and I. We had been the music and dance directors at the Campbell Folk School in Brasstown. And so now we're living in Asheville, and there's no dance scene. But one day I asked Jerry to tell me some more about the history of the place. And I said, I'd love to rent this place from you and put on a dance. And he's an old-fashioned mountain boy, Western North Carolina born and raised. And I am too. And I thought, there's this sympathetic magic between us, as though we were talking out of step with the times that we were in. Because he just thought, if you want to have an old-time dance here, that's what this place used to be. He said, I think you ought to just do it. So we put it on the calendar. We picked a date. It wound up being a Thursday. It was an open night, and it couldn't ever be on a Wednesday. We all know about that. Wednesday's church night, and anybody that might dance and go to church wouldn't dance if there was church night. And we were interested in anybody and everybody, just John Q. Public. And the dance has been on Thursday ever since.
Well, Fred Park came up with the idea. He's always been kind of a community organizer and had been involved in a community dance down in Georgia before he moved here, and wanted to do something to bring the community together. And back then there was a pretty small old-time music community and not anything going on in the way of dancing.
Fred Park was a lot to do with it.
He was always great at gathering people around him.
Wherever I was, and we had musicians there, and we had an open space and people, I would make a dance happen.
And as soon as he gathered people around him, the community started doing some of the work and taking over the event.
We set a date. The end of 1981, we started dances. Because everybody knew everybody, that's who we circulated it to. Tell your friends.
A local caller, Fred Park, called up and said there was this old dance hall on Warren Wilson College Road, and let's have a dance there. And I called there a lot in the early years.
Long lines forward and back, forward 2, 3, 4, back 2, 3, 4.
There's Phil and myself and Bob Thompson and Dudley Culp. Bob's forte was English dance, and he knew some of the long way sets, the contra dance. Dudley knew circles and squares, and he knew one or two contra dances. Phil knew a few old-time squares, and Peter Gott called Appalachian Big Set, the big circle dance. So I was the oddball. I was already teaching English and Danish and American contra dance and 3 couple dances and Sicilian circles and half dozen different couple dances. We wanted to try to go through the group twice. So everybody did a couple of dances, and then we started over. And we were asking people throughout the evening if they would be interested in coming on a regular basis. And we told them that Thursday night was our community choice, and that Jenny Armstrong and I lived a mile away, and that we would be the core band and caller until we could find some other people that were interested in presenting dance.
Sometimes our band played. In fact, I think our band was the very first one, because it was myself and my husband at the time, and Fred and his wife at the time were the Burning Desire string band. So I think we played that very first one, and not very many people came, but it was fun, and we played a bunch of those early ones. But if we didn't play, we came to dance, and we came to all the work parties, and so it was just kind of a complete involvement.
I've discovered from Raymond Peake, the old man who started the original Farmer's Ball. That's where we got the name, and the original name of the building was the Farmer's Ball. So I said, can I borrow the name? We'll just call it the Old Farmer's Ball. When I went back to Brasstown to visit with the patriarchs of dance down there, my old friends, and told them that I had this little dance started called the Old Farmer's Ball, Robert Anderson, one of the oldest families down there, he said, is that the place that Raymond Peake used to run? I'm looking at him and I'm going, how do you know him? Ah, man, when I was a kid, it took about 6 hours to get to Asheville from Brasstown. They said, and we'd get in a pickup truck. And we had these old canvas tarps that had been waxed so they could get rained on. We had them rolled up in the front. But if the weather looked nice, couples, he said, we'd put 8, 10 people in the back of a truck. We brought along food. We brought along some nice clothes to wear. We'd go all the way to Asheville to dance at the Farmer's Ball. And we'd go to the dance, and we'd been going. So we knew a few people, and we'd stay with families. And we'd get up the next morning having a promise, because they danced on Saturday night. And they'd have to promise they'd get up and go to church. And then right after church, they'd get back in the truck and they'd drive all the way back to Braston.
At that time in the 1950s, you could go to square dances 5 or 6 nights a week. And the young folks would travel just like sometimes contra dancers do now, but folks would go to square dances from Swannanoa to Cherokee to Haywood County, Waynesville Armory, and other places. But the Farmer's Ball out in Swannanoa was one of these dances. They were basically big circle dances. There were no contra dances. They would also do some waltzes and 2 steps. And as I understand it, by the 1950s, things were getting a little rough. People were bringing guns and alcohol, and there were some fights, and they just closed it down. The dance in the early days, I really saw as a community dance. The music and dance community in Asheville was very small back then. We all knew each other. And we'd all come out on Thursday nights, whether we wanted to dance or not. Sometimes people would just come out and drink a beer on the porch and watch and hang out. People would bring their little children who would fall asleep on the couches in the corner. There was no formal admission. I think it was a $2 donation if you could afford it. And the musicians might make $15 a piece or something for the night.
I know Fred Park was a lot to do with it, and there was this guy named Mark Mueller, and he, helped start it. And then I think they were the ones that booked the bands. Or sometimes Fred would be playing, or Bob Willoughby, or all those people.
Dede Styles grew up in Swannanoa. She was part of the dance community from the get-go. She and Fred and Jenny Armstrong and Julia Weatherford. So there was sort of a core of people who were involved. Bob Willoughby and Barbara Davis and Susan Jones and Charlie Broster and others were sort of the core back then.
It was definitely Fred. I mean, he had the initial inspiration for sure.
Fred is basically the one who instigated the whole thing, but he wasn't the one who was running it. Who was running it? That's a good question. It was very small, and I'd have to think about who was. I know Julia Weatherford booked it for a number of years, and it was basically just one person calling up and lining up the musicians and caller, and that was about it. Dede Styles was very involved with negotiating with the owners of the hall and what needed to be done for repairs. And
pretty soon, I got the job of taking up the money at the door. I took up the money, and I paid the band, and I built the chimney and put up the toilet, stuff like that.
Lots of families went, and so my kids had kids their age, and we would, over on the side of the stage, there would be a little area we would put down our blankets and lay the kids to sleep because it went on late into the night. And so they would play until they fell down, essentially, and then they'd sleep, and then we'd drag them home. So it was a lot of mixed age people dancing there.
The old Farmer's Ball in the 80s was one of the few things going. There was one music venue east of Asheville in Black Mountain, and only one.
We had a big wood stove, so somebody would come early, especially through the winter, and it would be freezing in there. There was no insulation.
My brother helped me, and we poured a cement foundation and built a chimney on the back of the dance hall so we could have a wood stove.
Somebody would build up a big fire, and some other people would come and sweep the floor because it was always really dusty.
Over the years, we built a back porch onto it so people could sit out there when it was hot. and they were tired of dancing, go sit on the back porch.
A lot of us were sort of younger then and had young kids, but really there was quite a wide variety of ages and backgrounds of people, and we all just kind of learned it together.
So anyway, this other guy that went to the dance, he was a stonemason. And so together with my brother and me and mixing the cement, and gradually over time, we built a nice safe chimney, which is, I think, holding the building up now. I'd take the pickup truck and pick through the riprap pile and get good building stones. In the evening, when it was time to go to the dance, I would get there a little bit early. And the people who came early to the dance would take the rocks out of the truck and pile them in the back of the dance hall. And I would have a box of chocolate chip cookies, and if you came early and piled rocks, you got cookies, see?
In using that old building on Warren Wilson Road, it was in sort of bad shape, and so the dancers would get together and say, well, it needs a new chimney, let's have a work party. And we built a new, Dede Styles probably did the building of the chimney, and the bathrooms needed new plumbing, and there's one thing, so we'd do work projects to fix up the building.
The toilets froze and broke, and I knew how to install a toilet, so we went to the ladies' room. We got us a new toilet, and we put it in and fixed it up nice in there. And then at the dance, I made an announcement that the ladies had fixed their toilet, and the men better stay out of our bathroom and don't mess it up. They wanted their bathroom fixed. They'd have to do it themselves. It was just friends, and we just did it. And it was stuff they needed. And I like to help out with stuff that I'm part of. So I helped out.
People would bring snacks to share at the break, and there was a big old snack table, and yeah, we'd try to keep the kids from reaching the cookies before snack time.
Oh, the other thing I did was kind of keep an eye on the kids. There was always little kids, and some of them would be part of the dance, and some of them just wanted to play, and I'd bring little things for them to play with and little treats for them. Because that's what I did. My master's degree is in early childhood education. One of the things that Fred was really adamant about was when you were dancing with a little kid, to not pick them up off the floor. And so he made sure always to talk to people about how to dance with the children and how to make it comfortable for them too.
When we started the dance again on Thursday night, it wasn't designated as a square dance or a contra dance, just a dance.
And there was definitely a variety of dances, circle dances, square dances, contra dances, couple dances. It was just dance.
And how did you all learn all these types of dances?
Well, Fred and I were in college together at Berea. That's where I first met Fred. And Berea has a big folk dance scene. And it included Appalachian dancing, both big circle dancing and square dancing, but it also included English dancing and Danish dancing and some couple dancing. And that's where I think he learned this stuff and wanted to be a caller.
Bow to your partner. Get your original partner back. Bow to your ladies where you stand. Sing that lady in the promised land. Sing your partner around you go. The man left with the corner.
So by the time I came here, through Berea, through the folk school experience to Asheville, I was teaching 3 couple dances and contra dances and Sicilian circles and square dances from the Shaw tradition from out west. The community was very open to learning. The dance at the Old Farmer's Ball, because I was mostly the guy calling dances, when I would come back from a trip, people were eager to figure out, the stuff that you showed us from your last trip was so cool, show us your new stuff. And I'd ask people, this would be the first time that I've actually taught it. You want to try it? And everybody was like, yeah.
A lot of the really fascinating and intricate dances that Fred Park used to call, because he knew a pile of them. and really tricky and graceful and almost geometric forms of motion moving in and out, almost like a kaleidoscope. And to walk people through that, they didn't have the patience for that. They didn't care about that. They just wanted to hop around. And so then it wasn't as much fun. I mean, there was one, people be going in while people were coming out. I loved it because I like geometry, and some of the other ones, and nobody calls them anymore because nobody wants to take the time to go through the walkthrough and learn how to do it. So I quit.
In the early days, I'd say in the first 15, 20 years of the Farmers Ball, people were simply interested in having a good time. And if it was a new and interesting dance, all that mattered is it was fun or it wasn't. Didn't matter what its history was or where it came from or how old or how new. We spanned dances from several centuries and 3 or 4 countries on almost any given night. And we also taught couple dance. So the Old Farmers Ball community from the early days knew how to waltz, they knew how to schottisch, they knew how to polka, they knew how to mazurka a little bit. They understood the basics of swing dancing.
What I noticed by the end of the 80s is there were fewer and fewer callers who were doing squares and more contras. And whereas most of us who'd started calling in the 70s came from the ranks of the musicians, in the 90s there was a shift, and the callers were coming from the ranks of the dancers. The dance had continued to grow, and it was outgrowing the space. And there was some discussion about what are we going to do? We knew that the floor joists were weak. We were worried about that. It was getting too crowded. Do we move the dance to a new place? Do we buy some land and build a dance hall? And other people were saying, no, this is where the Farmers Ball is. This is where it stays. And it was getting kind of divisive. And then on Friday the 13th, March 13th, 1993,
there was the storm of storms. We got 2 feet of snow in 12 hours. And the town stopped.
So there was this crisis. What are we going to do?
Well, Doug Orr and his wife Darcy, the president and the first lady of Warren Wilson College, play music and have been a major influence in some music circles in Appalachia and eastern United States. They found out about our little community dance, and they knew that a lot of Warren Wilson College students were coming.
The students used to walk down the road to the Old Farmers Ball.
It was a mile away from the college.
And be walking on the road late at night, and he thought this would be a great thing to have at the college.
And he said, the snow on the little roof of the little dance hall, he said, you're not going to be able to have a dance this week unless you just want to come over to Warren Wilson. And so that week, there was a dance at the old Bryson Gym on Warren Wilson College campus, and it's never left since.
And that sort of resolved the issue.
And that changed things in a big way because suddenly we had a lot more college students. And that brought in, it was great, a lot of young energy because by then some of the original people were starting to get older. But kind of probably less families at that point. And so that started this whole youth thing. And so then when the college students started going, then the high school students decided that was a cool thing. And so the age shifted quite a bit younger.
The old hall was very small. It could maybe fit 2 contra lines with maybe 12 couples. It was a very intimate setting. And when you move to a larger space and it becomes more of a public event, you lose that intimacy, I guess, and that sense of community. So the dance has been in Bryson Gym since '93 and has grown in size since then to fill that space. But it's also evolved into a contra dance.
The younger crowd were kind of on the tails of the big contramania that was happening, where all over the country, New England contra dancing became really famous. And there were bands like Wild Asparagus that would come down every year and play at the Old Farmer's Ball and other dance halls. And for some reason, contra dancing really caught on with some of the younger folks. And it got to the place where I think now they demand it.
The dance has transitioned now to a contra dance. There is contra dance every Thursday night from the first dance to the last dance, with a waltz in the middle and a waltz at the end. A square dance still does happen from time to time, but there are noticeably big numbers of people who immediately will go and sit down. They refuse to dance a square dance, or they refuse to dance in a circle.
I became an advocate for squares. I just saw that squares were kind of being pushed aside by contras. And there have been many times at the Farmer's Ball where I've said, get a partner for a square, and I've been booed. As a caller, squares are way more challenging to call. Contras, you can just read them off a script, and you can't do that with squares. Every single square is a person's personal creation. I see it more of an art form, whereas the art in contra dancing is the composer who writes them down.
It's a folk dance, contra dance. It's from New England. It's got its own wonderful history and its roots. But the old dances that are the traditional dances are just difficult enough. It would be a painful experience because you'd have to teach them.
I find it interesting that the dances that are being done at the contemporary contra dances, none of them are traditional dances. The traditional contra dances have all been chucked in the trash. And all of the contemporary dances, the contra dance, are all modern choreography, recent compositions dating from the last 20 or 30 years.
A lot of people that go to the Farmer's Ball now have never been there when they dance anything other than contra dances, and so they don't want to dance anything other than contra dances.
Over the years, especially after they got to Bryce and Jim, the people who were dancing, they didn't want to do it so traditionally. They didn't seem to pay much attention to the music, so they weren't always in time with the music. I guess maybe you could say they were more exuberant or more reckless. I mean, they'd sort of lost interest in good form. And they would just do any kind of thing. And they'd want to twirl you around 6 or 7 times for the ladies and all that. And see, my spine is extremely compromised in a place. And I have to be real careful about what I do and what happens to my back so I can keep walking. So if they're going to jerk you around all kind of ways, I quit going because it was too dangerous for me to do like that.
And also what changed is dancers began identifying themselves as contra dancers, which meant that the dance had shifted. It was no longer a community dance that is basically welcoming to everybody in the community, whether you're a dancer or not, but it became a dance community, which is a community of dancers. And as it evolved from a community dance to a contra dance specifically, the old-time music community felt less welcome there, were less interested, and whereas back in the day, in the 80s, the old-time musicians in the area were out there every Thursday night, whether they danced or not. But they quit coming. And what I saw happening was this evolution into more of a consumer thing where the musicians became a hired band rather than part of the community. Very little of the music comes from the Southern tradition anymore. And it's just changed to become something different.
They do have a lot of out-of-town bands that come through. Everybody wants to play the Old Farmer's Ball, or at least for a while they did. And that kind of changes the feel of it, because it used to always be just local bands playing. And just, when something grows, it grows to the point that it's not that little community feel. It's a different community.
Do you think that if the dance had stayed in the old hall, that you spent so much effort fixing and maintaining that it would have held on to the old traditions somehow better?
It might have, just because it's smaller. Couldn't crowd as many people in.
I mean, it has gotten to be a huge dance, and there's so many college students, not just Warren Wilson students, but young people from all over Asheville and the surrounding area.
And by the way, there weren't other dance communities around.
A lot of the regional dances have kind of followed on the tails of the Old Farmers Ball becoming a very young and exciting dance. I think it has had a lot of influence around the region.
Side by side with your partner, make sure you've got the lady on the right, the gent on the left.
I just gave it to the community. I said, there's enough people here calling. You guys don't need me. And things changed because I didn't understand to what extent people weren't interested in following the paradigm that was me.
Promenade, go 2 by 2. Take that lady along with you. That's how they do. Louisiana swing. Head couples. Into the middle and back you go. Into the middle and cross trail through.
Some other callers, they didn't like teaching intricate dances, and so they didn't know them. And they sort of encouraged the rest of them to fuss about teaching the dances. They didn't want any walkthroughs. They didn't want this and that, And so they sort of turned against the callers who were taking the time to teach and to tell the history of it and stuff like that.
There's something that used to happen for 15 years. Doesn't happen anymore, except when I go there, which is not much. We had one dance that started tonight. It was an East Tennessee big circle dance. Now, what that meant was the community owned that dance. You didn't have to call it. If I didn't show up and somebody else showed up to call, they'd say, take a partner for a contra dance. The community would say, no, the first dance that we do here is the circle dance. And if you want to come dance, because we all know it. It's called the Tennessee Mixer. You dance with one person, then you got a new partner and you dance to it. So pretty much everybody danced with everybody. And they don't do mixers anymore at the Old Farmers Ball. I love all dance. I do. A great English dance, or a great turning dance from Scandinavia. To see men dip women near the floor. I don't do that. I don't advocate it. It's another tradition. The contra dance is linear. It happens along lines and around circles. For two people to do something that is like that is to investigate swing dance. Now there's little flourishes and ways of being individual, but this thing that looks like a figure that takes a lot of space and time is dangerous because it comes out of a non-linear tradition and somebody's forcing it into a linear tradition.
The Farmers Ball has a reputation around the country as being kind of, I could say, unique or weird. There's a swing dance scene here in Asheville, and in my opinion, unfortunately, these dancers want to incorporate swing moves into a contra dance line, and they're more involved with what they're doing with their particular partner rather than the whole dance set. It's not a big deal to me if somebody throws in a swing move, but oftentimes they're late and lose track of the greater good of the hall.
It was more civilized. Nobody was jerking you around. Nobody was trying to twirl you 59 times. And when it was time to reach out to the opposite person, that person was in a place where they should be with their hand out. It was much more smooth. And now it's kind of jerky and bouncy. And I liked it when it was graceful and flowed from one pattern to the next like a kaleidoscope. But now it's not like that. It's like just dumping stuff. You know? This is the area of circle dances, Appalachian Circle, and we did those too.
Do you think that the Old Farmers Ball currently is helping to preserve traditions?
I think it's a little more free-flowing than that. There are some bands that want to play just old-time music, which is sometimes a little awkward for contra dancing, just a little bit different feel. And there are not that many people that want to dance squares, so there's a little rub there. There's a few bands that do play sort of more traditional New England style music. And then there's lots of bands, I think the majority of the bands that play there are in this more modern take on older tunes. There's a lot more written tunes, and they're a little snazzier and jazzier, and I think the bands a lot of times have drums, so they're rocking out.
It's funny because people are aware that this region has a music and dance heritage. And sometimes people go there and think, oh, this is traditional Southern Appalachian dancing, which A, it's not Southern Appalachian, and B, it's not traditional. But it's wonderful for what it is.
The various elements on the website include celebrate local traditions. Contra dance is not a local tradition. Appalachian big circle dance is a local tradition. It's hardly ever done there. Contra dance is from New England. It's from British origins and Scottish and Irish origins. And we are mixed down here, English and Irish and Scotch-Irish, and lots of others. But the tradition that wound up evolving here, how it's fundamentally different from New England is that fiddlers here didn't have the benefit of being anywhere near the cultural milieu of schools or teachers of music. So lots of fiddlers in the mountains made tunes that weren't 32 bars. So if the Old Farmers Ball is true to its mission, they would welcome somebody that doesn't play 32 bars. They would welcome somebody that said, hey, this guy grew up over in Watauga County and is going to show us some figures from here.
The music, I started as an old-time musician before I was calling dances, and in many ways I would put myself in the musician camp, specifically Southern Appalachian music, and there's less and less of that there. You're less likely to see a banjo than an electric keyboard at this point.
That does not bother me. I mean, I think tradition is important, but it has to be able to move and grow and be live, and I don't think you can try to put brakes on that. I also think it's fine to have a dance and say this is going to be a traditional square dance and have a traditional sounding band and a traditional square dance. But yeah, the Old Farmers Ball is not that.
In the beginning, it was everybody for everybody, and new people were welcome and people would help them. And
it was just a big community event, and anything like that where people have, and eventually it got a board, an official board, and then there's a different decision-making process. And so it kind of just evolved in the way something like that would do.
In the early days, we didn't have a board. We were completely under the radar. There was no formal organization until later on. But it was very much off the radar kind of thing, just a community of people who got together.
The lady who owns the building, we particularly Fred Park was friends with her, talked to her, and made sure that what we were doing there, to talk it over with Miss Wooten and make sure that we did it a way that was okay with her. Even now, he still goes by from time to time and visits with her and makes sure she's okay. And
I walked in the farmer's ball one night, and I hadn't been there in a while. And I don't know the person at the door, and I'm standing there waiting to pay my money. And these two people in front of me, a little younger than me, with thick accents. And they're trying to get in to just sit and watch. And the guy said, no, we can't let you do that. They said, well, this is my wife, and she's really not feeling very well, and we'll only be here just a few minutes. Maybe we could stand around. He said, if you don't pay, you can't come in. And so they started to go, and I walked out the door with him. I said, stop, excuse me. I'm hearing in your voice, your accents. Where are you from? We're from Hungary. And when we came to America, we had been researching little community dances, and we knew we were going to be in North Carolina. And even though we weren't well, we came to Charlotte, and we've been in Charlotte for a while, but we pretty much came to America to come to this dance. I'm crying in my heart. I said, wait right here. I said, I'll get you in. And I went in the door, and I got in this young man's face. And I said, do you know me? He said, no. I said, well, you're probably not going to forget me. I said, this is the farmer's ball. I said, let me tell you what I found out about those two people. And I told him their story. I said, now, I'm going to let them come in, and you're going to smile at them and just tell them to come on in. I'll find them a place to sit. And they're going to probably be here for half an hour, maybe an hour, and they might even get up and dance one. They came to America to be at this dance hall, and you're going to let them in, free of charge, as a compliment to the world of dance, because that is what we do here. And he's like, well, I don't think so. I said, you want to fight about this? I said, I'll just get on the microphone and tell the whole room about the conversation that we're having and tell their story. Let's see what the room thinks. He says, let them in.
I mean, it got to be a whole different atmosphere than it had been in the beginning. From one dance to the next, they would ask the person they wanted to dance with, and then the people who came there the most and who were the most practiced dancers, then they would run up to the head of the line, and they wouldn't ask new people, and then new people weren't really picking it up too quick because nobody was helping them. Just that whole atmosphere of more like a caring community. And the dance is not so much like that now.
When the Farmers Ball started, we would all go out there every Thursday night, whether we were on stage or not. And the musicians were dancers also, and it just seemed more cohesive in that way. And what's happened over the years, and now there's admission, there's somebody sitting at the door, there's paid sound person. It's become more of a professional music venue. And that attracts traveling bands to pick up a gig on a Thursday night. Personally, I don't go out on Thursday nights unless I'm hired. It feels like the musicians and callers are now the hired guns who come in. And rather than being community leaders, it feels more like they are employees. And as a caller, rather than feeling like I'm part of this community and here's what I have to share, it feels more like I'm an employee and here's what they want.
In the early years, I would say community is what it was all about. And in more recent years, with an elected board, There's been times through the history of quite a bit of friction, people having different ideas about what the organization should be and what it should do. And I think that that's probably why they came up with the mission statement. It seemed like it was time that it needed to be pinned down. And I think joy is a great mission statement.
Well, if the mission statement, which I haven't seen lately, specifically says joy, that's not a statement that I would choose. To me, it's more about community. Dances, to me, are an expression of community, and they can build community. And I think that is the power of this dance form. Yes, there's joy involved, but I guess in my mind, joy is more of a personal thing rather than a greater thing for the community. And if dancers are coming there just for their own personal joy, that doesn't necessarily feed back into the community and build community.
Well, the mission now, I think, involves the word joy. What do you think about that?
I think that that's a totally appropriate thing to have on the Old Farmers Ball website. But no one is really interested, in my opinion. I am a severe critic of the Old Farmers Ball simply because I truly know what it had been. There are very few people that you will run into on the dance floor that have been there from day one. Actually, to run into somebody on any given night that was there in the first year is not likely, ever.
I'm not as much involved in it. I do play there from time to time in various bands, but I don't go as often as I did. Back then, it was like the center of my social life and my kids' social lives. So it was a really neat place. And that's one thing that it definitely has changed, as we went to Warren Wilson and different crowds started coming. It's not the small community where you would always go to every event and see your friends. I mean, it's kind of much bigger, and there's a lot of people that I don't know anymore. The kids aren't that comfortable coming to the Old Farmers Ball as it is. It's a little more of an adult dance.
But you go to the dance, you see there's nobody brings their kid because it wouldn't be a fun thing.
I've seen the dance from the very first Thursday night right up to the current time, and I don't call it as often as I used to. I don't play it as often as I used to. I acknowledge that it's a thriving scene and it's a wonderful scene, but it's not where my heart is.
And I think it's not just in the dance, though. It's in the community at large. Over the amount of time that I've lived just here in this little community of Lytle Cove, it's changed a lot because now there's people from Florida, there's people from Texas, they bet their summer homes and they don't like it if they have to drive by somebody's trailer to get to their house. But the trailer was there when they bought their land. The older kind of people who lived here are getting outnumbered. I do natural dye, and you talk to people, they want to do natural dye, but they want to go to the store and buy extracts of whatever. I go out in the field and pick the fresh stuff, bring it home and dry it, do it like people used to do. Nobody wants to. I teach that, and people say they're going to do it, but I don't see them doing it.
I'm not opposed to traditions changing because traditions have to change. Otherwise, it just becomes fossilized. That's not what I'm trying to do. People go to contra dances for lots of different reasons. When else do you get to hold hands with people you don't even know in our society? So it's definitely, it brings people together.
It's just that the people cared about each other more. I do think they did. Now they got their little phone thingies and whatever, and Google it and buy it at the store. And it's a different mindset. And they go to the contra dance, and it's different. They go there for a different reason.
Things evolve. Things change. I'm Julia Weatherford.
My name is Phil Jamison.
I'm Dede Styles.
My name is Frederick Park. I'm the guy who started the Old Farmers Ball, who handed it to the community, and now here it is years later, and it's still going on.